Hi, in this video I want to go over a few topics. Like in most videos, I want to cover a few topics, then babble on and lose context of the conversation or the internal conversation I'm having. So in this video I want to talk about um, this idea of pieces making up a whole, like how we're pieces and making up a whole, and how our thinking and how we think and how it's really mechanical when you start thinking about your thinking and things like that. And how once we reach the top of the tower, or once we reach the destination we've been so long waiting to reach, we're already looking for a new destination. Or how it doesn't really mean much to have a destination. And more on projections of value. So this idea of I want to cover one thing at a time. So how we're how we're all individual pieces, how you say if you eat something and then you consume it and then you defecate, you take a piece out of someone, did you really eat them? Well, you ate them, you ate a piece of them. I don't think there's really much making a distinction. Yeah. This idea that we're made up of different pieces, I have a heart, I have a liver, I have lungs, and all these kinds of things. It makes a whole, yes, but it's still individual pieces the different individual components that make up a whole. And this neurology that connects all these pieces together. But once they're torn off of you, once a piece is torn off of you, is it still a part of you? It was yours. It was part of you. It still belongs to you because it was still part of what you were born as. But it's no longer a part of you. You're no longer feeling that part. You're only feeling the flesh wound or whatever it may be in place of that. So you're no longer feeling the piece anymore. That, say you ripped off half your hand, you're no longer feeling off the ripped half part. You're only feeling where you ripped it off from the rest, where you're still connected. So you're still an individual. You still have boundaries. Obviously, there's a point to where you start lopping off the hands, the arms, the extremities, and you get to the brain, and then that's when you just completely shut down. That's when you get to the center. That's when you get to the point where it can't take any damage, otherwise it's just going to break apart. You take us apart in little itty bitty pieces. It still created a whole to begin with, but it came from something and transformed. Cells multiplying, creating a human being based on this mixture of a semen cell and an egg, leading to one large thing. And then you can take it piece by piece, but it was one large thing, regardless of all the small components that make up. And it goes back to the idea of the sum of the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. So yes, we're greater than the sum of our parts. We're greater than just our heart. The heart is obviously a function, a mechanical tool, a function, a mechanical machine, part of the machine as a whole, that's causing this whole thing to function as a whole. So it's just a piece, but it's one of the pieces and the critical and crucial components that makes this thing. This thing is driving the whole thing, sort of like all these pieces are working off each other, and that's where the idea of the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, because these different individual parts are creating a whole and trying to function as a whole and work as a whole to create a different function or mechanism as a whole, as opposed to these individual parts, because the heart on its own wouldn't mean much of anything unless you're examining it for some reason. But as these individual pieces in ourselves, where they create a whole that creates a different function, and it creates a whole for a different function for a different purpose. So this heart's pumping blood through my body, and the lungs are letting me breathe in oxygen and exhale carbon dioxide, so that I can function. It has a different function. I'm giving the carbon dioxide to the trees and the plants, and the oxygen is fed to me based on this system of like I rub your back, you rub my back, and we're living off the environment, the environment's living off of us. Cannibalism, right? We're relying on them, and they're relying on us. But this idea that this heart is pumping the blood, I'm allowed to breathe in oxygen, based and also based on how our interactions with the environment and all sorts of things. These symbiotic relationships that we have with the environment. And this heart's pumping blood, and these lungs are inhaling oxygen allowed because of the trees and so on and so forth. And our very function is allowed because of the things the way they are and so on. And this also, I want to go on the idea of how this illusion of choice that we have. There's no real choice. Things are going to happen a certain way. So let's make sure I remember that. So this idea, yes, this function that we have, the heart's pumping blood and we're breathing in oxygen, but it's doing it so this whole thing can live, so that the lungs are breathing in, so that the heart can pump blood, and the heart's pumping blood so we can get blood oxygen and we can breathe in, and so on and so forth. So they're functioning in conjunction with one another, so they can create this whole and work as a whole to create this more different purpose, function, mechanism as this whole thing working forward. Even if they are individual parts, it's still your heart. If you rip your heart out, and if someone puts their other heart in you, say like a heart transplant, it's not your heart, but it's still doing the same function. All these functions are the same. We're all doing practically the same thing, regardless. So it doesn't matter who it is, what unique characteristics you may have. You're still doing the same thing as the other person. You're still having likes, dislikes. You're still living in the condition. We're pretty much irreplaceable. It doesn't matter. These superficial additives that we have, such as our taste and things like that, don't mean much of anything. It's about the condition of the being, not how you get to that condition. It's about how the being feels, the sentient being feels, as opposed to their unique quality. Like everything's unique, every little piece, everything, little molecule moving in interaction with each other is unique, doing things, bumping in a unique way, in unique circumstances, leading to unique things and things like that. So yes, all these individual parts are creating create as a whole a different purpose. So yes, regardless of you taking us apart, we're still as a whole, and it creates a whole. So to the next subject. So what's the other thing I want to talk about? So this idea of reaching your gratification. So you reach your gratification, right? So you're constantly looking behind a curtain and not behind a curtain, and then you reach a dead end. You reach a wall. You reach a corner of a wall, and you say, before long, all these things that you've been building up, and finally you get to them. And then what happens? You get to a corner in a wall, and it's like, okay, this is the thing. This is the glory I've been waiting for is in this corner right here. And then you're on and looking for something else. It's like, well, I can't do anything else with this. I'm here. I have it now. Okay, I have it. I have it. Unless you have some function or purpose, getting caught up in another purpose moving forward, you're obviously moving on to something else. And that's a very function of the momentum. And in another video I made about the sandwich thing, it's the beginning and end that creates the purpose, even though the sentient thing doesn't see purpose in the beginning and the end. That's the function of creating some kind of meaning, is that there's going to be an end, and you're just living out the momentum, the function in between, based on the zero-sum game that creates the nothing in between the bread sandwich. It's just a bread, and some empty air in between, and there's all, say air, it's the zero-sum game making up that air, where we're deprived, and then we're getting back to the zero-sum. That's why there's nothing in between, because it's a zero-sum game. We're depriving ourselves to get satisfaction. And this momentum, there's nothing to really grasp onto, right? Okay, I have something, and you don't even have to have the perception of recognizing it. It's still the same thing, regardless of you understanding it or not. So you're still grasping at straws. You're not really getting anything. You're just moving. You're moving forward, and you're moving to another thing, and that's all we're doing. It's the chase game. That's all we're doing is chasing. We're constantly chasing. Okay, I got that. Okay, I'm in the corner. Okay, this is what I've been waiting for. I'm at the top of the tower. Now you're looking to be at the bottom of the tower, and that's this whole meaning thing. We're never going to find a meaning, because we're going to be finding and looking for some other revelation. We're revelation seekers. Once you find a revelation, it's just creating another revelation. Okay, I got this revelation. I figured it out. But then you figured it out, so now what? It doesn't matter how. There's a revelation. Once you're beyond the revelation, there has to be something else. The constant mystery of the universe that we're living in. There's not much of a mystery. Okay, I'm here. Yes. Okay, I figured this out. I got to the top of the tower, but I need to get to the bottom of the tower now, because I'm sick of being at the top. I'm homesick from being at the bottom of the tower, for being at the top of the tower, not at the bottom of the tower. So I want to be at the bottom of the tower now. So We're constantly seeking revelations, and that's the thing. That's the whole idea. That's why we don't get exactly what's going on. It's semantics, words, applying words to things, how words aren't the same mechanism by which we think, but we think by our words, but different concepts. That's why you find some kind of disconnect when you're trying to think and explain something sometimes, because you can't necessarily put it in the same way. It's a perceptual thing, and we're perceiving more than we're applying words to these perceptions. We're going one layer further from the actual objective reality that we're living in when we're describing something. And it's based on all these individual circumstances. We're living in the same reality, but based on our perception. Perception is everything. And when we apply words and semantics to these perceptions, it starts muddying the waters when we're trying to describe these things. So you're going one step further away when you're just describing your perception and your experience and how things work, because you have to make sure there's some common ground between the way you say something and wording it correctly. That's why you need to be very precise sometimes with how you say something and using the right examples and speaking a very specific way, being nice and things like that. Because people subconsciously block things out, like selective memory. They'll selectively choose and not choose what they want, even if they don't necessarily recognize what they want to get or not get. So it's all a process of describing, and we're going further away with words and perception, experiencing things, and how we're reaching our goals and things like that. So describing things and perceptual experience, you're going one step further and away from the objective reality experiencing when you're describing something, so hoping that there's some common ground, even if it's not exactly the same experience as someone else. So you're trying to explain something based on a reality that you're living in, based on your own experience. So it's kind of muddying the waters when you start describing things, using semantics and describing things based on some reality that you're living in. And the same thing with hitting a brick wall. You're hitting a brick wall, you want another revelation, you're constantly seeking revelation, you're constantly seeking something more and more and more. You've reached your goal, you've reached your destination, you've reached where the echo was coming from all this time, and it was nothing. It was just it was just you saying something, and you reached the wall where it was reflecting off of, and it's just a wall, and there's nothing more to it. And that goes back to the idea of things like this idea of, hearing a piece of music or seeing a piece of art and applying all these different characteristics of a curtain and seeing something infinite, thing, but it comes from an origin, it comes from something. It comes from something, and that something is just a basic process of reality. And obviously perception based on that and how you project things and, take in things can mean something, but it still doesn't mean something. And when you recognize where it's coming from, you could see it, you could still experience it, even if you recognize it. It's just a little harder once you recognize the truth. And saying it's just vocal cords and a vibration of a string and vibration of some, plastic. It's nothing more. And it's just moving those things together. You create something more out of it, and then you apply some kind of fantasy world based on some kind of concept and things like that, of ideas, and based on a piece of art or something you hear or something that makes you feel inspired. And it's just a feeling, it's a projection, it's a state of mind, applying projections to those states of mind and going from there, sort of reaching the corner of the room, realizing it was just you saying, where am I? You reflected, it comes from a corner of a room, you try to find it, you've been searching for it for untold amount of years or whatever it may be, and you finally reach your destination, and before long you have your revelation. Oh, okay, that's what it is. You're disappointed. Regardless of your feeling, disappointment adds to the tragedy of recognizing this. But you reach it, and then you recognize that you come to revelation, and if there's nothing beyond that revelation, where do you have to go? So once you realize where the world came from, you're based on the mechanism that creates our very thought processes and the crude forces that control us. The crude forces of the dead-end nature of reality is another crude force that can become a weight on the consciousness and something like that moving forward. You can't move forward. There's no more revelations. What am I going to be doing? I guess I just have to keep getting caught up in the game, and there's obviously going to be revelations because we're constantly moving from one beginning to end. We're constantly having this momentum moving to an end based on a beginning, because there's going to be an end regardless. So we're moving from beginning into an end, living based on this, where we are right now, and living in a biological life and dying and so on and so forth, a beginning and an end. So we reach an end, we reach revelation, and we're on to another revelation. It shoehorns its way in because that's the very nature of reality. But once we recognize all the scientific proofs and everything, once we realize there's no more magic or mystery to things, and it's all just inside our head applying it to, once you know it's just all in your head, and you recognize that overpowers you more than the fantasies in your head. And I think that's another thing, is these fantasies, these people that are philosophical but also have these fantasies, they let the fantasies are always one step ahead of the philosophy, and that's why they always use those as a source of argument and a source of mystery, a source of something beyond the understanding, something beyond something. But you have to realize you're just going to be searching for something more right afterwards. You're going to be searching for another thing. But once you realize all these things, they want to stay one step behind. They want to constantly be away from the real fact. They want to stay stagnating between one and the other. They want to go forward because they know it's going to be a dead end soon. But they have to recognize that's the truth, and that's the nature of reality. Once you recognize all these truths, your denial is not going to mean anything. Especially once you know it and you deny it, but you know it. You know it's the truth. Denying it's not going to do you any good because you know it anyway. So you're denying for no good reason, and you're so once you reach a dead end, so what does that mean, right? You reach a dead end, you're on to something else. That's the way life works. Life's a problem, and creating problems, and then fixing the problems as best you can, and then moving on to another problem. And then it's like taking two steps back and one step forward, and 2 steps back and then another step forward, and you keep on moving one step back. But sometimes you can stagnate and so on and so forth. But once you reach those revelations, you're going to say, well, what about this? And that's why we're constantly trying to figure out the nature of reality. Well, there's nothing more to it than we see and we perceive. It's exactly right in front of us. It's just figuring out the details of these mechanisms. Just because things seem unreal to you, and just because, the person's dead, no longer they're feeling, sort of like, I see things, but I need to see them and understand them in a different way that makes sense. I need to apply words to them. But you're going to keep on trying to apply this internal logic to these things, and constantly and applying internal logic to the outside world. And the outside world, the only thing that's causing that, and the questioning and the ideas inside your head, the outside world isn't begging anything of that kind of scrutiny. It's just the way it is. That's the way we're perceiving it. And coming to a revelation or some kind of conclusion isn't going to change it either. You're just going to come one step closer to recognizing, okay, well, this world just isn't really much beyond what I perceive, and that's exactly what it is. One revelation leads to another. Even if there's no, even a revelation, recognizing everything, it just is the way it is. It's just questioning why and when, where, and whatever. The details of this, it's exactly right in front of us. No matter what, we're experiencing everything the way it is, no matter what we think or whatever it may be. So it's only coming from inside of us, based on these crude mechanisms and questioning, based on something that we weren't necessarily meant to question, but happened to question, meant to, based on a deterministic universe, yes, leading to something. But that deterministic universe doesn't create some kind of equilibrium based on what we know, the suffering, and the fact that you concede that there's some kind of equilibrium concedes that there's some kind of suffering and not suffering, and so on and so forth. But just because things happen a certain way doesn't mean there's some kind of equilibrium. Things are just happening a certain way regardless. And that's the way the world's working and how we interact with it, based regardless of our sentience being subjected to these crude forces around us and crude mechanisms all around us. So the world isn't, we're just constantly seeking revelation, just because it's not based on this internal logic. This internal logic is foundationless anyway. You're just trying to answer a question based on this internal logic that you have, but you realize this internal logic has no foundation either. And this foundation leads to more questions and more seeking revelations, feeling like revelation leading to another revelation. I need more of an answer. What's the beginning? Well, what became before nothing? Nothing became before this. It's right in front of us. We just don't want to accept. We're based on this mechanism that's driving us to think there's something more. There's nothing more than the mechanism that we understand and that we see and perceive. It's just the thought process that we apply in perception and projections of value that confuse us away from the reality that we were living in, that confuse us, like religion and things like that take us away from what we know to begin with, or that we shouldn't take, giving us knowledge that we shouldn't know to begin with, to confuse us, and so on and so forth. So we're constantly seeking revelations, and there's nothing more based on this internal logic that we're trying to figure out. Well, why? But why that? But why that? Well, it's just exactly the way it is. You could keep asking why based on an addition to this internal logic that you have based on some kind of foundation, but you have to realize that that foundation, that logic has no foundation either, and these revelations are just going to keep leading, and you're going to reach a dead end when it comes to factual recognition and objective realizations and things like that, and then you're going to reach an end, and then it's just about the mystery of leading forward the interactions you have from the beginning to the end that mean anything. And I want to touch on another subject real quick, and it's the idea of our thought process. When you think, it's a very mechanical process. Once you think about your thinking, it's a very mechanical process. You're thinking to about thinking and thinking about thinking and thinking about thinking. But that thinking is very mechanical. It's just thinking ideas and concepts based on your language too can obviously come into play, and that's how you think can come into way how you think. And this is leading to how you think and how it's very mechanical. You're thinking of words and you speak them. It's a very A, B to C, and the only thing that causes any deviation is if you just reach a premature conclusion, the A to C as opposed to D, or coming to some kind of irrational conclusion. It's just a very mechanical process. These are just very mechanical processes. Once you think about it and you see it, it's just A to B to A to B to C to C to A, and jerks and this leading the other thing. It's very mechanical. You can spew your thoughts out very precisely to a certain extent in explaining your thoughts. So our thoughts are very mechanical, and once you see that, it's exactly how I'm speaking, only it's internal. And you apply perception and things like that based on your own point of view. That's why our thoughts are more personal than our words speaking to someone. So they're very mechanical. So yes, our thoughts are very mechanical. The world outside of us doesn't expect any scrutiny. It doesn't ask for any scrutiny. It doesn't need any scrutiny. Oh, it needs scrutiny, but it doesn't ask of any scrutiny. It doesn't need scrutiny. Okay. Yeah. So yes, and this idea of taking us apart and things like that. And I think there's one more thing I wanted to go over real quick too, about our perception and things like that. I can't remember exactly. Implying things. Not quite sure. Just give me a minute to think. I'm trying to remember. I just don't want this video to go on too long. Okay. It had something to do with the idea of taking us apart and piece by piece. When I was going on that, the sum is greater than the whole, and the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. And our perception and boundaries and things like that. I don't know. I might add on to this video, but I can't remember right now. But thank you, and until next time, bye.